Hey everybody, I'm back with part 2 of our Frankenskirting. So we learned last video how to deconstruct the skirt, take all the pieces apart. And one of the things that I mentioned was to not separate the belt from your short layer initially. A couple of reasons. One, I like to keep it that way until I'm ready to resew the skirt. But you do eventually have to take off that belt. The same way you just do the little U-cut that I showed on the first video. So I have several skirts and a bunch of different stages of Frankenskirting. So the first thing that you want to do when you're matching up your layers is you want to make sure that they're both facing the same direction. So that can seem simple, but some skirts, like if they have amla, you can tell. Like the shiny part's out, the little duller side, face it, is like the wrong side of the skirt. But to double check yourself, because sometimes the layers look almost the same, you're gonna wanna look at the side seam and you'll see that they folded it over. So the front of the skirt has just the little stitch, but the back side is where the fold is. And that's true for both of these layers. So back side of the skirt, fold, front side of the skirt just has the nice little seam, okay? So you want both sides facing out or facing the same direction. You're gonna take one edge and then go across to the other and see if they're the same width. So this is not. This blue long layer is about 1 inch wider. For most of us, that's not gonna make a huge difference on how the skirt wears. It's okay if they're a little bit off. If they're several inches off, you might want to reduce the width of the waist of the skirt. You can do that. I don't have time to show you that for this video. Maybe we'll do another video in the future. I have taken a regular skirt and made the waist the same size as a junior by cutting down the edge and then just re-hemming the side of the skirt. So you totally can do that. So, but since this one's not perfectly the same width, what we're gonna do for our stitching to find the center of your layers, you're gonna fold each layer separately in half. And you're gonna take a pin and put it right there in the fold of the skirt. So right here, grab a pin, and this is just my marker. It's the marker for the center of the skirt. So I'm just gonna slide that through the layer there. So now when I bring it back out, I have a pin right there in the center. Okay, now I have to do that same thing with the other layer. So the pin is now going to be the center of the skirt. I recommend doing this even if they are the same width, mainly because it helps when you place your belt. And I'll show you why in a moment. So I found the center and I'm gonna place a pin right there in the fold of the center. Ta-da, I have my little center marker. So now we're gonna take the skirt and we're going to place the layers front of the skirt facing down. So you want your short layer to go on the bottom facing down. So the front of the skirt is facing down. Yep. So that you have room to work with the skirt, right? That's why we're doing this. And it's gonna help with getting that belt on there. So again, make sure you have the edge of your skirt facing the right way. I want the back of the skirt right now. So the front of the skirt is going to face down. I have my short layer on bottom, my long layer on top, both of them facing down. And I have my 2 pins here in the middle. This is the middle of the skirts. I'm gonna line this up a little bit, but really not fussing over it too much, because now I need to find the middle of my belt. There should be a buttonhole in the middle of your belt, but occasionally they're off center, like 1 inch or so. If that's the case, go ahead, check your belt, find your ends, match them up, see if it's in the center. This one's almost completely dead on. Do you have another skirt? It's off about 1/2 inch. If it's off, still make that the center of your skirt. It's just gonna help with the styling, wrapping. If you have an extra inch on one of your ties, they're hardly ever gonna hang perfectly the same length anyway when you tie it. So having the buttonhole in the middle is gonna be helpful. All right, when you're looking at your belt, after it's been de-stitched, it has 2 folds or hems. One is shorter It's kind of hard to see because they're the fabrics. One is smaller, one is larger. Almost every time. I've deconstructed probably 30 skirts at this point. Almost all of them are made this way. We're going to take the short side in our middle buttonhole. The skirt only has one buttonhole, makes it a little bit easier to figure out what your middle buttonhole is. But if there's 3, make sure you have your middle buttonhole. We have the short hem. This one has a little string there. Get my little seam ripper. And I'm just pulling the string. There's a string attaching the skirt to itself. Okay, so I am going to know where all these extra strings come from. Speaking of extra strings, this is a great reminder. When you deconstruct the skirt and you seam rip, you take all those little seams out. There's a lot of little fuzzies. Here's an example of one. Here's a little fuzzy. That's from another skirt that I seam ripped, and these will get caught in your sewing machine. So you need to go through your layer and pull them all out so that there's not any left in the new layers that you're working on. Very important. Don't want to forget that. Oh, look, here's another one. This one's still attached to this skirt. So we would pull that out. That one's really long. Pull it out, get rid of it. We don't want to get that in the sewing machine. It's, you know, going to run the sewing machine. Okay, so you have your belt hole, buttonhole. You're going to line that up with your middle of your skirts. I've got the pins there. I don't need both pins anymore. I can take them out and repin all 3 layers together, right where that buttonhole is. Now remember, this is the short hem. We are lining up all 3 layers. Layers are facing down, forward, the forward or front of the skirt is facing down. We have the short layer on bottom, long layer next, and then the belt, short hem of the belt, so that if you pulled the belt out, you have the longer part of the belt going this way. So then we can fold it over. So I've already pinned a skirt to show you what it looks like. So you don't have to watch me pin 25 pins, maybe just a few. That's how you find the middle of your skirt. And then you take it through all the way to the edge. One thing about the edge is that you often need to rip out a couple extra stitches in the belt so that it'll lay flat when you are adding in the final pin here, because otherwise it'll start to fold here and you don't want to have a dart in the belt. It'll make the belt not lay flat against your skin. So you may have to take out a couple of stitches there to pin that last bit of the belt to your layers, okay? And so I start in the middle, around the buttonhole. You're gonna pin around each side of the buttonhole and go across all the way to one side, and then you'll go across to the other side. They may not line up absolutely perfectly. This one doesn't. It's 2 different brands, but it's so close that when you'd wear the skirt, it would swish around anyways. But some of them do line up perfectly. I have a few I can show you if you really want to see them that line up just perfectly. But if you're using different brands of skirts, sometimes they don't. I buy from a bunch of different suppliers and sellers, so it just happens that way sometimes. So I have a mess on my table now because I dumped my pins out. Always, if you dump your pins out, put them back in the container because they will get stuck in the silk. Silk's so fine. It'll get stuck in your silk. It could rip a hole. You could, cut yourself. So put your lid on and get that out of the way. So I have a skirt on the sewing machine and I have all 3 layers pinned and I sewed part of it. But I just wanted to share a couple more tips when you're sewing. So all 3 layers are together, and that short hem, we are gonna sew across the line where that old hem was taken out. You can actually see, I don't know if you can, yeah, on the video, really tiny, those holes. We're gonna follow that. Boy, I thought I saw a string, but it's just part of the fabric. We're gonna follow that to help us with our line of sewing. You always want to take your pin out when you get close. You don't want to pull this fabric too tight. That's going to make the silk pucker, not lay as flat or as pretty. You don't need to have chunks of looseness, but gently just pushing it through the machine. I'm gonna go ahead and take this pin out. It's getting pretty close. Pins help keep the skirt in place as you're sewing. Silk is very slippery. It may be helpful to have a lot of pins initially as you're working on it. You can also use, I did my first few skirts with these clips. They work similar to pins, where they just kind of hold the layers in place, but they're heavy. So sometimes they can make it feel like the skirt is a little bit heavy. I often hold up this part that's hanging down because it does get heavy and it starts to pull on the fabric. I like to sew slow. I don't want to rush. But you would just go through that line. Oh yeah, look, one of those little guys got through. I don't want to get that in my machine, so keep your eye out. Even if you have pulled them out, you might still get a few more as you're sewing, and you just want to be mindful that it can clog up the machine and get down on the underneath parts. One of the reasons you always take your pins out first is if your needle hits your pin, it can break your needle. So we definitely don't want to do that. Sometimes I will double check that I'm not getting extra fabric in the machine. I was getting close to it over there. So it can be good to make sure that your extra fabric's not going to be in the way, that you're not getting darts in the skirt where you don't want. And you can tell my seam is not perfectly straight. They're never perfectly straight. Don't feel like you have to make this a perfectionist project. In fact, if you are a perfectionist, I would say don't sew on silk fabric because it never comes out perfectly the way we want it to. When you get close to the edge, I always just double check again that my skirt is going to be lined up with those, or that my belt is lined up with those bottom layers or the skirt layers. And then again, I have a little extra belt. I don't have to sew all the way on this piece. When you get to the edge, you want to go through your layer and then stop. Then we can take it out of the machine, cut your threads, and then we will go on to the last step of the process, which is folding the belt over to the front of the skirt. I'm gonna make another video for that. I've been talking a lot. You guys are probably tired of hearing it, and you need to get through this stage of the process before you can do the final process. So that's a wrap. See you in part 3 for Frankenskirting.